Hello, listeners. Welcome back to yet another episode. Thank you for all the support on our last episode and everything in between. But here we are for another episode on a podcast where a current and ex-student athletes sit down and have real discussions with other student athletes and ask the questions that nobody really asks. My name is Maya Falcon.
And my name is Ariana Fernandez. And this week we are joined by our fifth guest. She is a former swimmer and swam for the University of Toronto Varsity Blues, and she currently specializes in selling natural wine to restaurants. We have Adrienne Friesen. Hi, Adrienne. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited.
We're so excited to have you on.
We're stoked. It's going to be great. So, Adrienne, from what I understand, you're not actually from or were born in Canada. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
A bit of a transplant.
Yeah. No worries. All good. So are you from, is it North Carolina? Is that where you were born?
Yeah, I was born in Baltimore, but I essentially spent my whole childhood in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So really nice town. 10 out of 10 recommend.
Very nice. I think I looked at a school there at one point.
It's like the UNC Tar Heels, so it's a college town. I grew up, it was college basketball, college football, everything, all the time.
Oh, that's so fun. Like we said in the intro, you were a swimmer for the University of Toronto. So what brought you to the University of Toronto? Because a lot of times we hear about Canadian athletes going to the States for school, but it's not as common as we hear an American coming to Canada for school. What brought you to the University of Toronto?
For sure. Yeah, it was a bit unexpected. I was kind of heading into my senior year and I knew I wanted to go to a really academically challenging university. And I also wanted to be able to swim. And then threw in the combination of, I also didn't want to graduate with a mountain of student debt. And that quickly became an almost impossible equation to fill.
Yeah.
And I got into, some of my dream schools where they weren't going to offer me financial aid, or I got into, an awesome academic program, but I wasn't going to be able to swim. For example, UNC, I just wasn't fast enough. Mm-hmm. And so the clock was ticking down to that May 1st decision day, and I was, pulling my hair out. It was that time. And finally, I was like, wait a second, I'm also Canadian. It's like, what if I just go up there for school?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, as an American, the only places in Canada are Montreal, Vancouver, and Toronto.
Yeah, the basic.
I was like, well, Vancouver's too far. Montreal's too cold, and I don't speak French.
Mm-hmm. So there you go. Yeah, perfect.
This is an elimination. I like it.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Mid-April, and my mom and I flew up for 36 hours and kind of met the academic advisor, met Byron, the coach of the swim team, met a couple swimmers on the team. And I was like, cool. This is it. This is the spot. I just knew right away. The campus is beautiful. I'm not sure if you've ever seen it. It was just, it was love at first sight in a way.
Yeah. Isn't that the best feeling when you're going through that whole process of trying to find what's next after high school, and then you finally find that school and you're just like, this is the one. You're like, yes. Yeah. And you get it's just such a good feeling. I remember having that.
Yeah, it was very satisfying. And it was funny though to come back, and everybody at my high school was like, where are you going? Where are you going? I'm like, I'm going to University of Toronto. And they're like, where is that?
In Canada?
In another country?
That's awesome. I mean, I feel like especially with college recruiting, I don't know about you, but for me, I went through it twice because I transferred. So going through it once was more than enough for me, but going through it a second time I was really done with it. And sometimes college recruiting, I feel for some people who really struggle with it, because it can be really frustrating, especially when you're in a position where maybe you're not the most looked at on paper. It's hard to get your name out there and to kind of vouch for yourself to coaches. Yeah, I promise I'm good. I swear I can do better. I was kind of in that position where I was like, my times weren't quite there because I went through a plateau. And by the time I was getting recruited, I was just coming out of it. So I wasn't the best on paper, and talking to these college coaches, trying to boost myself up almost. I was like, okay, how do I go about this? How do I make myself look good, even though on paper I might not be what they're looking for? So It's really interesting that you said that, you know, you might have not been the fastest swimmer, but you were still able to find a place that you loved, that you felt at home, which is really hard to find. I feel like some people don't actually get that when they're in recruiting. They don't find the place that, you know, you just know when you know. That was the case for me, at least. Like there were a few places where I was like, this is it. And then I go to another place and I'm like, maybe this is it. Like, I don't know. I didn't know until I had to sit down and write it all, you know, pros and cons kind of thing. How did you, I mean, especially coming from the States, did you find a difference looking at American schools versus Canadian schools? Like, did you ever feel that with any of American schools? Like, oh, maybe this is the place I want to go to?
Yeah, for sure. Like, yeah, there were spots that I absolutely wanted to go to in the States. And I think it's tough because in the US, like the college athletic machine is just so much bigger and there's so much more spotlight on things. And again, yeah, if your times, you know, if you're not the top 10 on your huge club team, are you getting looked at? So that was tough too. And I think that the other part that is really hard to manage, like especially when you're at that age, is realizing that wherever you go, it's not just, you're not just going to be like at the pool and at the classroom, you're going to be living in that environment. That's kind of like the X factor that you have to bring into the equation when you're looking at a school. You can't just kind of check your boxes. Yeah, it has to somehow feel right.
For sure.
Yeah,
I agree.
That's a great way to put it. Even I don't swim anymore, but I remember when I finally decided, like, okay, maybe I just maybe won't swim varsity and I'll just go to a school just based on school, like in academics, right? And even still, like, even though I'm still living at home, I still wanted the campus and the facilities to feel like somewhere I want to go and feel comfortable in. You know what I'm saying? So you're right. It's a lot more than just checking boxes.
Yeah, I think it's tough too with if you are a swimmer where maybe you're not going to make the team at your dream school, or you just think that, you know, university is going to be challenging enough where you might not want to have that athletic career on the side. Coming to that realization and like thinking of yourself as only being a student, to me was terrifying.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think my mom was the one who kind of explained it to me like that as well. My dad was mostly like, you have to choose a good school for swimming. Like, obviously you're an athlete, like you want to choose a good school for that. But my mom was the one, like, she kind of held the other perspective. She was like, well, let's say for some reason you had to stop swimming. You have to choose a school that you actually like. And I was like, wait, what? Like, I never thought of it like that. Because obviously being an athlete, you only think about athletics. And it's hard because obviously you go to school for school. It's not just athletic, which is very, sometimes for athletes, it's hard to put that aside because we've mentioned it before on the podcast. But when you're an athlete, it almost becomes your only identity. When you only identify with a sport, when it's the only thing that defines you, it's hard to imagine your life without it. So finding a school that you both enjoy in and out of your sport is super important.
So when did you actually stop swimming, Adrienne?
Wow. Yeah, it was actually just at the end of my freshman season. I was really hoping to obviously make it further, but I only did last one season at U of T. Essentially, I have joint instability throughout my entire body. Fun. Yeah. And my shoulders eventually just gave out. It was, you know, chronic overuse. We see it all the time in swimmers. I feel like it's like, you know, so if you're a swimmer, like one of your friends has shoulder problems.
Yeah.
100%. Like I am the shoulder problem friend. Hello. And it was just getting worse and worse and worse. And my decision ultimately came down to the give and take between I can live in pain, which is a horrible way to look at your life, as long as I'm getting faster. And then I stopped getting faster. And that was the point where I would kind of hit the wall. And I was like, well, I'm not going to keep pushing if I'm not getting the results I want in the pool. And I'm just in pain all the time. And so I had, you know, a big cry. It was May of my first year. I was wrapping up my exams and kind of came to this realization that I wasn't going to go home and train with my club team over the summer. And that I was just going to go home and I was still coaching at the time. So that was kind of nice. I was still like involved in swimming that way. Yeah. Like, gentle ease out. But that was the ultimate, I guess, like equation that I posed myself, which is a terrible one to think of. And I think that, especially that age, like what was I was 18, 19. That's a really big thing to ask someone. And I maybe you guys can talk about this a little bit. At the time when I was swimming, there wasn't as much mental health support as hopefully maybe there is today. For somebody who when I say I was in pain all the time, I was literally in pain all the time. Like I couldn't sleep on my side. I couldn't blow dry my hair because I couldn't lift my arm up high enough. You know, I couldn't carry my backpack with a certain amount of books in it. Like it was a disaster. And that kind of pain, when you have it every single day, it really grinds on you mentally.
For sure.
Because you're no longer thinking about your exams. You're no longer thinking about, you know, your homework and your projects and all these rigorous things that you're doing academically. You're just thinking about, you know, when's the last time I took my Advil? You know, like, do I have massage today or do I have physio today? Is that going to get me through the next 3 days or not?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you're seeing now that maybe there's a bit more support on the mental side of that, but there definitely wasn't when I was there.
Mm-hmm. And that I can only imagine that's really hard to go through. I mean, imagine being in that kind of physical pain. That's a thing with being an athlete and having all these chronic injuries. Obviously, that takes a toll on your physical well-being. Obviously, you're in this physical pain day in and day out. To counteract that, you also have that mental pain that you're going through, because I can't imagine all these feelings, all these emotions that are arising with that physical pain when you can't do the sport that you love. That's so frustrating. You know, you want to get better. You want to do all these things for yourself, for your team, so on and so forth. And you just can't. And that's really frustrating. I completely get that. I mean, Maya, you can probably touch on that too, but
I feel like we had the same lives, maybe just about a few years apart, you know, like what you just explained is like, I experienced something very similar. You know, I was obviously, every athlete has like, they're tired, they're sore, you know, they're pushing themselves. So there's that kind of pain, like training pain, but then there's just straight pain and just like injury pain, right? And some people get to a point where that injury pain just becomes normal, almost like kind of you forget what it's like to not feel like that, you know. And it's really hard. So how was that feeling of being forced to retire, especially because it was just out of your control? And I'm sure you did everything you could to try and, you know, fix the shoulders and calm them down a bit, but coping with something, such a big change at such a big time in your life, how was that?
Yeah, for sure. I think like also I'm a really stubborn person, so I absolutely like explored every avenue possible. U of T has a really awesome sports athletic clinic, the Macintosh Clinic. I love the people there. So I was trying everything, you know, I've got like acupuncture, I've got like you know, like the electromagnetic waves, I've got, you know, like physio. I was firing on all cylinders to try to fix this thing. Because I was like, you know, captain's going down with the ship. I'm not gonna give up until I have to. And the only real solution out of it was for me to get surgery on both of my shoulders. They were going to be able to overlap at most, I think, by 3 or 6 months. And it would have put me out of commission for 9 months minimum. And when you're looking at a 4-year college career and you're already 1 year into it, I'm like, am I going to come back for like one final hurrah senior year? Am I going to be any good? Probably not. And so that's kind of, when that combined with the fact that I wasn't getting any faster was really what made me pull the plug on it. And right away, it's kind of like when you make that decision and you realize it and you have that big cry, it's like the air just gets taken out of the tires immediately, right? The feeling of deflation is massive. And again, at the time, I feel like I didn't, unfortunately, like have the support that I would have wanted to have had. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of just made my way through summer. As an athlete, you know, you're like, oh my God, what am I doing with my body now? So I became like a weird gym rat. I had a gym rat phase. It was terrible.
But that's okay. We all have it. It's okay.
What am I doing? Like on this like elliptical? Ew, no. Yeah. And then I got really into running, and that was like a really nice way to kind of transition to doing something else with my body that like filled that headspace. And I got really into trail running as well, which was really fun. And I love being outdoors. And then I was also running like 5K, 10K. I did a couple half marathons. And so that kind of like transitioned me into the realm of being a recreational athlete who was still hyper competitive, but not in a hyper competitive setting.
That's awesome. And I'm sure that took some time. It definitely didn't come right away. Is that right?
No, running is horrible. Like, my God, it's
period.
I completely agree. As a swimmer, you would think, you know, like, oh, I have all this endurance, I'll be able to run. I don't know about you. I like being in the water because I don't feel sweaty. When I'm outside, when I'm running, I hate it. You know, afterwards, okay, fine. I'm like, yeah, I'm proud of myself. I ran. In the moment, I hate it. Absolutely hate it. I don't know
Yeah.
what it is about running, but it makes me feel disgusting. I don't know how
I'm
people.
also
It's
I'm
bad.
also just not good at it. I try. I do try my best, but I'm not good.
Mhm.
But yes, you were saying, sorry, you hated running.
No, it's terrible. It's one of those things where you have to force yourself to do it for like,
Yes.
2 months before you even get mildly good at it.
Mhm.
But I think what I love about, and today I still run a fair bit and I swim, and now I'm into biking as well. What I like is the purity of it, which you also find in swimming, right? I'm like, what's the most straightforward sport you can do? You can run down a road or you can like swim through a lake, right? So like, let's
Yeah.
not complicate things. I
Yeah.
was always horrible with hand-eye coordination.
Me, you and me both. Oh my gosh. I say it all the time. I think I have two left feet. I don't know what something about swimmers, just their hand eye, just being so uncoordinated on land. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
It's
Sorry.
kind of funny.
Yeah.
It doesn't work at all. My basketball career in grade 6 lasted until I like airballed in the middle of a game and I cut myself. I was like, I'm
It's okay. It's not for all of us. We all have our strengths and weaknesses,
Exactly. See, I think that's the other thing is like finding obviously what you enjoy and what not necessarily you don't have to be good at it, but good enough so it doesn't feel just like suffering all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once you retire from your sport. And it's fine to like play around with things too. Like you come full circle on things. I used to use Pilates as cross training when I was swimming, and now I've like gotten back into that and found that it's really wonderful.
Mhm.
So I think it's finding those athletic pursuits that like scratch that itch for you without
Yeah.
driving you insane at the same time.
Mhm. And I think it's really important to also, you mentioned it, but you tried different things. It's not like you just, stuck to running. You tried different things. You tried Pilates, cross training. I think that's so important. I mean, obviously, I haven't gone through that transition of life after sport yet. I know it's coming up. I've mentioned it before. I know it's coming up, but it's really important to try and branch out because even being a swimmer, if you think about it, going into swimming, I'm sure you didn't just stick to swimming as a kid. I'm sure you tried other sports and other avenues and tried to see what you were good at. You mentioned basketball too, like it's important to try other things because even I feel like life after sport, it's almost like being a kid again in the sense that you have to try other things to try and find that happiness, to try and almost transition your passion into something else because otherwise you'll just be existing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's on the mental side of things too. There's like a weird emotional immaturity that you almost have to go through. It's like you're having like a second adolescence, which is a terrible, terrible thing to have.
Sure.
You're like, oh God, now I have to figure out who I am as a person again.
Yeah.
And so I think just like trying on as many hats as you can, like seeing what sticks.
Mhm.
And that applies to career and academics as well. I've transitioned my career massively, I would say like once now. When I graduated, rather, I graduated with a Bachelor of Commerce and I went into digital advertising. And I had a pretty good run at that for about 5 years. I was working mostly in ad agencies, doing media planning and buying. And then eventually I kind of started taking wine classes on the side. I picked up like a part-time gig at a restaurant, really fell in love with that. And then just out of the blue, a posting for a wine agency came up that I had a friend of a friend at, threw my hat in the ring there, somehow managed to get the job. I honestly, to this day, I'm like, how did I get this job? And now I've been at that same job for 4 years now, and it's been awesome. So I think it's like, it's also staying open to those opportunities that come your way and using that kind of competitive spirit that you gain through your years of athletics to, go out and go after things. Like, why not?
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned that you had one career in digital advertising for 4 or 5 years. Were you just unhappy with it? Like, did you just feel like something was off that made you, change your career? Like, what was the defining moment that made you decide to switch?
Yeah, for sure. It was pretty funny. It's advertising's fun. It's a lot of fun. And you get to do a lot of different jobs within your job role. There's always a lot on the go, especially if you're working agency side. It's very fast paced.
Mm-hmm.
But what I found is that after a while, you do have to work with clients where you don't necessarily believe in their ethos.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was
awkward.
Yeah, awkward, right? And that's kind of where I hit the wall on that. It was a bit of an existential crisis in a way.
Yeah, no, I bet for sure. Just like how swimming got taken away from you or derailed because of your injury, you know? Like it's hard, but in the end you do see maybe it was all for a reason kind of thing, you know? So do you looking back on it, do you ever regret or think about changing any decisions that you made in regards to not having surgery for swimming or changing that your career? Like, does any of that ever ponder in your mind?
Good question. I think there's 2 points to that. The first is that I wish I had asked for help as a teenager. I
Yes.
wish that, or that's, I mean, like ideally somebody reaches out to you, but I wish I had had enough of a voice to ask for help. At the time I was, just like, again, dealing with chronic pain where I was taking Advil and doing physio and all this and just kind of dealing with it on my own, hiding it a lot often. It's a bit shameful. It's like, you don't want to be seen as the kid that's always injured. That's, why is Adrienne doing the set with fins and a kickboard again when everybody's pulling? Like, what is she doing? She just must be lazy, right?
Yeah.
And so there was like a lot of shame and a lot of fear and hiding around that. And I wish that I had been more proactive and raising my hand and being like, no, like I'm in a lot of pain. Like, let's find an actual solution to this instead of trying to just continuing to barrel through things.
Right.
I think that that's what I would say to anybody who is young and going through like a chronic injury is advocate for yourself as much as you can. You cannot, like, you literally can never over advocate for yourself.
Yeah, it's hard. I remember that was a big thing because I remember I had 2 surgeries one season, and then right after that something else was starting to bother me, like my elbow, and you think to yourself like, oh, you're the kid that's always hurt. You're the athlete that's never doing what everyone else is doing. You're just trying to find a way out, but really you're trying to find a way in because you can't. Like, I just wanted to train properly. It got to a point where it wasn't even about racing and performing that way. I just wanted to train like everybody else was training and actually do a practice that everybody else was doing, and it gets hard. And when you talk about not having a voice, was it the fear of shame, like you said? Like, what was that fear really? I know you said lack of resources too, but where did that really come from?
I think it just comes from, not wanting to be like the squeaky wheel, right? You just want to fit in. You want to be able to do the sets that everyone else is doing. Even if you're the slowest one doing it, at least you completed it, right? Yeah. And I think I just didn't want to draw more attention to myself than I needed necessarily. I think at the time, like, my self-esteem was pretty low, and that's something that like I've massively worked on since I was a teenager, as most people have. Like, oh God, being a teenager is terrible.
Yeah.
But yeah, in that sense, it's hard to ask for the help that you need. And honestly, if you're somebody that deals with chronic injury when you're in your teens and your 20s, I hate to say it, but like, I'm still dealing with chronic injuries today. Like, this is the life it is sometimes, but you get so much better at it. Like, wow, in July of 2019, I fell down a couple stairs and I shattered my ankle.
Oh no. Oh, that sounds horrible. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So I had to have pretty immediate surgery. I had 3 breaks in it. I've got a massive amount of plates and pins in it to this day.
My.
But I was so much better prepared going into it. I was going to therapy every couple of weeks. I, had a nice support system. I felt like I could ask for what I needed. I didn't push myself too fast, too soon to get back into things. But then when I did feel like I was okay, I did push myself quite hard because I knew what my limits were. And so eventually, just with time, you kind of gain this awareness, right? Of like how much you need to ask for and how much you can ask of yourself.
I think it also takes time. Like, you have to learn about yourself. You learn about your needs. Going through adversity, it teaches you, you don't realize it, but it teaches you so much about yourself. And you learn so much about what you need, not about what you want, what you need, because sometimes what you want isn't technically what you need. Like, for example, going through an injury, sometimes maybe you don't even, I think being a college athlete, sometimes you aren't aware of the resources. I know for me, like, going through my first year of college, I wasn't really aware of the mental health resources that we had available to us. And I think as college athletes too, sometimes you just are too afraid to ask for help because you don't want to be the squeaky wheel. You know what I mean? Like, you're just, or maybe you're afraid or you don't know who to reach out to.
I'm curious, do you find that your coaches were kind of open to having those kinds of conversations? Or was it still kind of like, you are a piece in the team, we all need to be doing the same thing, the bus is leaving without you?
Here's the thing. I mean, I know Maya and I have had very different experiences, but I mean, I've gone through different teams where it's been like that, where the coaches just straight up don't care about you because they don't care. Because you're not fast enough, because you're not providing the results that they want to see. So they just kind of ditch you. They leave you in the dust kind of thing. But I've also had coaches throughout my career completely opposite, who have cared about me and my well-being, and they're open to having that conversation, genuinely texting me or calling me to ask me if I'm okay, not physically but mentally, if I'm okay. And that is like complete 180 from what I was used to as a club swimmer. Like, I just, growing up, I went through a plateau where I just wasn't getting any better, and it was really hard because I just felt like no one really cared. But then growing up, going into high school, going into college, I've had coaches who have really cared about me, who have come in to the bathroom as I've run straight to the bathroom crying, complete mental breakdown. I've had coaches who have come in to check on me, and that's such a change for me because I wasn't used to it. I think coaches now, hopefully, are more equipped, are more aware of how to kind of pinpoint those athletes who are struggling. I think they're more aware of how to go about it and how to talk to their athletes about it. I want to hope that's the case, at least, because mental health, it's something that everyone has mental health, obviously, but there are some people who really struggle with it. And I think it's really important to have those figures in your life to reach out to you and see if you're okay. I hope people are more equipped to do so.
Talking about coaches who have reached out, quick time, I just have to shout out Don Burton, because I remember when I was kind of in your spot, Adrienne, when I was a swimmer. Don Burton, Mina Sharif, Amber Hutchinson, Megan Buttle, and Dr. Dilkis. So many people were just so supportive in a time that was very, very difficult. And I know I could be a pain in the ass during that time because I was just so frustrated. But those coaches and everyone that I worked with while I was still swimming did such a great job at really, really trying to help and advocate for me. And if it wasn't for them, I feel like things would have been a lot different. And if you're an athlete too, and have a teammate who's dealing with something like this, maybe you don't know the full story, and that's okay. But just, it wouldn't hurt to ask them how they're doing, how the injury is doing, how the coping is doing, because it's lonely, especially when maybe you're the only one who's kind of really dealing with an injury and something like that. It is lonely. And I think, I can't imagine, Adrienne, what it was like to, feel like you didn't have a voice, because a lot of people still do feel that. But I hope, like Ariana said, that everyone is more equipped and more educated about how to deal with things like this, because it's so real and so relevant, especially for student athletes.
I think the loneliness is especially tough when your injury is chronic.
Yeah.
I've had friends who have, like torn an ACL, which is obviously a horrible thing to go through, but at least the recovery is a little bit more straightforward. Whereas if you're dealing with something that is chronic and doesn't have kind of an easy fix to it or an easy timeline on that fix, that's where things can get, into that like really like lonely spot where you're like, I'm just out here trying to fix this thing and
yeah.
working.
Yeah, and you feel like you're working so hard. You're doing, like you said, I did the same thing. I don't even know, acupuncture, electroshock wave. I did this weird like jackhammer thing. It hurt, but I thought it would work, and none of it was working, and you get so frustrated. But I think, in the end, if things do have to either pause, stop, or you need to change direction, that's okay. It's not easy, but I promise you, I ended up half okay, like I'm doing okay, right? And I'm sure, Adrienne, you're doing great too. Like you're doing something you really like.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's hard. So
we're here on the other side, we're waiting for you.
Exactly. Come join us. Join the party. It's a club, right? There are people who are dealing with things just like you, or who have dealt. And if anyone ever has any questions too, like reach out to people, reach out to your coaches, and coaches reach out to your athletes too, for sure. I know I'm not a coach, but I know that when my coaches definitely came up to me and spoke, because I valued their opinions and their ideas very much, it meant a lot.
Kind of going off of that, you mentioned obviously going through that really rough time of having that chronic injury and that going through all that physical pain, when you were injured and when you ultimately had to make the decision to retire, how did you cope with those feelings that came with that decision of retirement? I'm sure it wasn't easy, but how did you cope with it?
Yeah, for sure. Honestly, like I probably didn't cope well. Like I think I'm more of a person who is, here's what I did, don't do it. You
Yeah.
Yeah, I overtrained myself. Like I said, I became a bit of a gym rat, and like not in a very healthy way. Until I got into running, which was a much more healthy approach to things. I've always been like a bit of a nerd. I've been like good at school, cool.
It is cool. Stay in
that for
school.
And so I was like, I'm just going to get really good at school. So I took a lot of really tough courses at U of T, which is a really rigorous academic program and has a lot to offer. So that was really nice. So it was good to like kind of stretch my brain in those ways as well. So that was a bit of more of a healthy coping mechanism of sorts. But I think there is like a lot of pressure to be like, and I think we're seeing this like, at least I am with my age group, and especially during the pandemic, to kind of like monetize your hobbies or to make your hobbies competitive and not just do something for the sake of enjoying it. You know, like these days you see people they feel like they have to, if they're artistic, for example, they feel like they have to be selling whatever art they're making. Or if, you know, if I get into running, I have to like compete and win in 5K races. I think it's a much better approach to just try to step back a bit and do things for the sake of pure enjoyment and joy.
If you could go back and tell yourself, you know, first year Adrienne, how would you help yourself cope with that transition from life after sport?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I think I would ask myself to be gentler on myself, first of all.
For sure.
To not have such high expectations out of the gate, to take some time to just mellow out a bit, you know, to maybe have a nice summer where you're not working, not competing, not doing anything.
Right.
And just take some dang time for yourself. Because when you're a student athlete, like, man, every second of your day is scheduled.
Sure. Yeah,
it really is.
Yeah.
100%. It's really hard too. Like you don't really, it's almost like you don't get a moment for yourself. Like, yeah, you have the weekend, like standard week for me. I have practice every day, obviously school every day. Sunday is my only day off. Sometimes I feel like Sundays aren't even my day off. Like I'm thinking about, obviously I'm prepping myself for the week because I still have to do my homework on Sundays. I'm catching up with everything. Or let's say I had a dual meet and Sunday is the day that I get home, but I got home at like 1 or 2 a.m. So I really don't have that much of a Sunday for myself. Like it's really hard to find time for yourself almost, and, you know, allow yourself to step back and be that student for a second, not even just an athlete, just be a student for a second, be a normal person for a second. Going in college after you had to retire, how did you make time for yourself?
Again, something that I honestly probably didn't succeed at right away, and something that I feel like I succeed at now way more, like as an adult. Again, I felt like I had to keep firing on all cylinders and like fill my calendar all the time. And whether it was, you know, doing some extracurricular activities through the business school or through my residence or whatever it was, I was just trying to, you know, fill slots so that at the end of the day, I wasn't just like sitting alone in my room being like, what is going on? And I think it would have been much healthier to do a little bit of that, but also to have that downtime in a supportive way. So whether that's, you know, hanging out with friends that really just like make you feel good, or if you're not, maybe you're Zooming with a friend or a parent back home, something where it's low key, but you're feeling like you're supported, I think is really, really important. If you've done something for so long and it's really actually become a part of you, you will come back to it.
Yes.
I started swimming again maybe 3 years ago. And I absolutely love it. Like it brings me so much damn joy. It's the best thing in the world. I don't go very far. I swim like 45 minutes. I swim like 2,500 yards. It's very cute, but it's great. I have a nice time doing it because I went like full nerd. I got like so far ahead in my classes that in my last year of university, I had a full semester off. I just like didn't have anything else to take. I was like, cool.
Yeah. That's a flex.
And so I traveled for 2.5 months by myself.
Wow.
And I just like packed up my bags. I made a little itinerary. I booked essentially like a ticket that took you all the way around the world with different stops, and took all my money I made from my retail job, and off I went.
That's amazing. See, that sounds like such a stretch now because obviously we're in a pandemic, but that's
God.
right. But in my mind, that sounds like such a dream. I would love to do that. Not many people get the chance to do that. So that's amazing that you were able to do that.
Traveling solo is great as well, because after you're an athlete, you still kind of like, you have those skills with you. For instance, like when I travel, I love running by myself because it's a great way to see whatever city you're in. Or, you know, whatever sport you're doing. Maybe if, say, you play soccer and you're going to Spain for a few weeks, maybe there's like a rec league that you can drop in on a Wednesday night or something like that. And it's just a really great method to meet people, because a sport is just like so universal.
You know, going from being an athlete, loving your sport, being able to transition that passion into something else. Adrienne, how are you able to transition your love for swimming into your post-athletic life?
You definitely can. And like, you'll find things that eventually kind of like scratch that same itch. But I think that, again, like coming full circle back to it, just brought me a lot of joy to be back in the water. I don't know if it's just swimming. I'm sure other people feel the same way about it. But once you're able to approach your sport again at a later age with a different perspective, with feeling more confident in yourself, more grounded in yourself, more kind towards yourself, it's a different experience, and it's way more fulfilling. And then you've also already built a life where, you know, you've got some other stuff going on, you know, whether it's a fulfilling relationship that you might have with your partner, or your career, or, you know, maybe you have a pet that you love, or your family. You have these other kind of bits to support you as well. So that when it comes to enjoying that sport or that activity that you love the most, it doesn't feel like there's so much pressure for that to be the be all and end all that brings you everything.
I think also it's having a different appreciation. Obviously, you mentioned with perspective too, like it just changes. Obviously, it changes your perspective, but you have a different appreciation for it almost. Like it's almost nostalgic. You know, you're a swimmer and then it abruptly gets cut, and obviously it's heartbreaking. But being able to go back to it, I am sure that's it's a nostalgic feeling. Like, at least for me, like, for example, I've grown up in a small town, but now I go to university in the States. But when I come back here and I come back to the place where it all began, the place where I started swimming, where my very first club, the very first pool that I swam in as a 6-year-old, that is nostalgic to me. And it makes me think of swimming differently.
Yeah, I think we all have an inner child. And
sure.
sometimes we need to embrace that. But moral of the story is that injuries are hard. Being an athlete, being a student athlete is hard. You have a voice and it matters. So if you are dealing with an injury or just something in life, you have a voice, it matters. Be a good friend, reach out to others, and, you know, love what you do. That's kind of
moral of the story. Yes, period.
What we're saying. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. You mentioned being a swimmer for the Varsity Blues. And you kind of mentioned not being the fastest swimmer too. I mean, I felt this growing up, not being the fastest swimmer on the team. But how do you think you can make an impact on a team despite not being the fastest swimmer or best athlete?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, right, a team is going to have people that aren't the fastest necessarily. Not everybody can be the fastest. And I feel like my situation was kind of funny because throughout my entire career, I always felt like I was the slowest of the fast kids. Like I was always training in the best training group, but I was the slowest one there. Just kind of like holding on. I'm like, I'm here, I'm doing the thing.
Yeah.
And so, I didn't have much of an outward leadership role in that way because I wasn't the captain necessarily. Right. But what I found was I was always like really good technically. My technique in swimming was always like pretty dang spot on. And so I leveraged that into coaching, and I did a lot of coaching when I was in high school and then a little bit in university as well. And I felt like that was like really where I was able to make the biggest impact was on these super young kids. I did private lessons for like kids down to like age 1 in the pool, which is very cute. And so you can always like leverage whatever talent you have in the sport in a different avenue. You might not even be on your team while you're doing it, right? But like if say, you find that you're actually really good at rehabbing your own injuries, maybe you can help out at the physio clinic, maybe you can intern there. or yeah, maybe it's coaching for you, or maybe you're a real stats nerd and like you get into that side of sport, or you're like helping your team keep track of those kinds of things. There's lots of different avenues you can go.
For sure. And I feel like growing up, I always heard this, but one of my coaches always said, you're not bigger than the sport. And I feel like that's so true. Like you don't have to necessarily contribute to your team, but your sport in general is so much bigger than just your team or just yourself. You know what I mean? Like I think that's a great point. Like you can impact other aspects of the sport instead of just a team. You know what I mean?
Touching off of that, do you think that, because I know varsity teams have team captains, when it comes to club swimming, maybe not so much. I never really had a team captain at a club team, but I know like Ariana at FSU you do, and I know some people that currently swim at Varsity Blues who also have team captains. But do you think you really need to be given the title of a leader or that title of a team captain to actually be a leader or lead or just have an impact on the team? You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, for sure. No, I don't think so at all. I mean, oftentimes the team captain or leader is the person who has the loudest voice, and they might not even be the best leader. I think swimming is a great sport in the sense where you often have kind of, different training groups, or you've got different age groups, or things like that. So you've got these smaller like pods, of swimmers where maybe there's room for you to be a leader. Like you're leading the set, you're leading the lane, you're leading that practice that day. And I guarantee that you showing up and maybe, you're having a killer day. You're like, wow, I am like really crushing this set today. But there's somebody at the end of your lane that's not. And if you're able to kind of keep an eye on that and give a shout out to that person, see maybe if they could use some help, or if they could just use, like a friendly, hello, you're doing great, hang in there. That's like such an awesome way to make an impact, rather than you don't have to be the person giving the speech after, the meet win kind of thing.
For sure. I think also leaders are able to, maybe they're not named a team captain, but I feel like good leaders are able to understand the people around them. They're able to understand their environment, like they're able to contribute to one goal by understanding people. Not many people are able to do that. Like they're not able to, some leaders are solely focused on themselves, which make them horrible leaders in my opinion. But the best ones are able to communicate to other people around them because they understand that it's not just them in this. It takes a whole team to get to a common goal, especially on a college team. Like you don't want a team captain who's only focused on themselves. That is a horrible way to lead a team, let me tell you.
Yeah. I think too, you don't have to be the fastest to be the leader. Maybe in the swimming world, okay, you're the best, but when it's human interaction, teammate to teammate, coach to teammate, are you the best, or are you just good at the sport, right?
We all know people that were the fastest, but they rolled into practice 5 minutes late every time, and they didn't listen when the coach was talking, and were just kind of generally checked out or disrespectful. And just because you're the fastest doesn't excuse you from being a good person.
100%.
Like Ariana said before, you're not bigger than the sport. Nobody is, right? So at the end of the day, who are you really as a person when it comes to those interactions and idea of being a team, right? So we are starting to wrap up. It's been going really well, but we ask all guests that we have this. Usually the question we ask is, what does your sport mean to you? But with your situation, Adrienne, it's a little bit different, right? So you're kind of a retired student athlete and you kind of just have passions. So really our question to you is, what do your passions mean to you? Whether that be running, your job.
Yeah. I would say that now my passions are really like a form of self-care. And I think that's been especially needed during COVID times and during the pandemic, where unfortunately a lot of them have been taken away from us. It's not as easy to go to the pool. It's not as easy to do some of the things you want to do, but the ones that you can do and you can still have in your life, I think are really important in terms of keeping yourself grounded, dealing with stress, feeling like who you are as a person, and feeling confident about that. So I think that that's what I use them for now.
So our last question that we have for you, we ask every guest this question. We're gonna make a playlist with all of these hype songs. But
I already have.
Oh, good, as you should.
Oh yeah.
We ask every guest this question: if you could choose one hype song for your day-to-day life, what would it be?
Oh man, to like pump myself up for
get you in a good headspace, whatever it is.
The first thing that came to mind is Spice Girls Spice Up Your Life.
Yes. Yes. Love
Applause.
it.
Is there anything that you can like shout out for yourself?
Plug yourself, hype
Plug
yourself up.
yourself.
Plug myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think right now I work for a pretty fun agency for part of the time called Grape Witches, and we have a wine shop on Dundas Street in Toronto. So if you're looking for like some tasty wine and you're of legal drinking age, please come check us out.
On my way.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much, Adrienne, for taking the time today to sit down with us. We really appreciate it. I hope everyone listening, hopefully you took something from it, but I really appreciated it. I appreciate you. And thank you so much for, again, sharing your time with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. No, this was super fun. I loved it a lot.
I'd like to mention Adrienne actually reached out to us on Instagram right before we took a break, or like, I'm pretty sure it was like the same day or something. Adrienne had messaged us and we didn't see it really until afterwards, but once we were ready to get back into it, we responded, and as soon as we read the message, we wanted to record an episode. So thank you for reaching out to us, because your story is exactly what this podcast, or is one of the main reasons we had this idea for the podcast, was to share the real and raw stories of athletes who have been through it and maybe didn't quite get to where they wanted to be. So again, like Ariana said, thank you for sharing your story, because I know it's not easy and it probably wasn't. So thank you for using your voice that you were able to find eventually to share your experiences with us and sit down and talk with us today. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. No, it's great. I'm glad I reached out.
But thank you for tuning in to this, what is the 7th? Oh man. 7th episode. Wow. 7th episode of the podcast where we ask the questions that
nobody asked.
We'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye. Yay.